The wind cut through Silverton, Wyoming, like a sharpened blade in the winter of 1891. It howled across the plains, rattling the station windows, and carried with it the smell of iron, coal, and wood smoke. The snow crunched beneath every step, echoing in the near silence of a town too small to care, too weary to greet strangers. On that afternoon, the arriving train dragged itself across the tracks, groaning and complaining as though it, too, had grown tired of the long journey. Clara Hayes stepped down from the last car. She was bundled in a thick wool coat, her breath rising in small clouds before her face. In one hand, she held a heavy trunk that seemed too big for her frame. In the other, hidden inside her pocket, she carried a yellowed letter that had traveled longer than she had. She had read those words so many times that the paper felt more like an extension of herself than a possession, and yet, every time she touched it, the weight pressed heavier than the trunk in her hand. Samuel Cooper, a widower of 59, had written the letter. He was a man tired of loneliness and silence, a man who wanted a woman to build a life with. But Samuel's idea of life was tied to his own vision: children, heirs, someone to carry on his name. Clara, 58 herself, had not come for such things. She had come in search of honesty, presence, and above all else, someone who understood what it meant to stay. When their eyes met across the platform, the disappointment was almost audible. Samuel's gaze lingered for a moment, then slipped away like he had seen something he didn't want to admit. "I thought you'd be younger," he muttered, his voice half lost in the wind. "I'm 58, Clara replied, her tone firm, her back straight. "I wanted to start a family, raise children." "You wrote clear enough words," Clara said, her voice sharp as the wind. "But you didn't write what you were truly thinking. And I didn't come here to bear children for strangers." The silence that followed cut sharper than any words. Samuel turned, walked away, and with him went the faint hope of companionship he had dangled before her. He didn't offer to carry her trunk. He didn't offer even a backward glance. The train pulled away with a whistle and a roar, and Clara stood alone on the snow-covered platform, her hands trembling not from cold, but from the sudden recognition of her own aloneness. The station clerk offered kindly to store her trunk until the next train, but Clara shook her head. She bent down, grasped the heavy handle, and lifted it herself. Every step she took echoed with defiance. The snow stung her face, the wind stole her warmth, and the weight of the trunk dragged her body. But she walked deliberately, as though to tell the watching town, "I will not bend. I will not break." It was then that Ethan Blackwood appeared. He was leaning casually against a post near the station entrance, his breath forming steady clouds, his posture relaxed but not careless. His eyes carried no judgment, no pity, only a steady calm that seemed out of place in a world so harsh. "Let me carry that for you," he said. His voice was low, deep, and without insistence. Clara hesitated. Accepting help had never come easily, but there was something in Ethan's gaze, something unshaken, grounded. She nodded once. "Thank you." He took the trunk, not as if it were a burden, but as though he understood what it meant beyond the weight. For Clara, it was not weakness to accept. It was wisdom. For in that moment, she recognized that someone who knew how to stay was worth more than all the empty promises she had read in Samuel's letter. The ride to Ethan's cabin was long and quiet. The horses' hooves crunched rhythmically against the packed snow, their sound the only beat in the stillness of the plains. The trunk rattled against the wooden boards of the sleigh, groaning with each bump in the road. Clara sat silent, the cold biting her cheeks, but inside her heart warmed slowly, as if thawing after a long freeze. The cabin greeted them with the smell of pine and strong coffee. The fire inside snapped and hissed, spreading heat that felt like a blessing. The place was modest, no larger than it needed to be, its wooden walls etched with the marks of years gone by. Ethan set her trunk near the fire and poured coffee into a tin cup, handing it to her without a word. They sat in silence, but it was not uncomfortable. Every gesture, every pause, spoke its own language. In that silence, Clara realized something remarkable. She had, perhaps for the first time, found a place she could stay. But the Old West was not a land of peace. It was a land of hunger, suspicion, and survival. Only a few nights later, there came a knock at the cabin door, hard, sharp, and demanding. Jedediah Carter stood outside, snow-crusted in his beard, his eyes sharp with calculation. His voice was low and wary. "Evening." Clara's hand moved instinctively to the revolver resting on the table. She lifted it, steady and unwavering, her breath calm though her heart raced. Ethan stood beside her, tall and unflinching, saying nothing, his presence as solid as the logs that made the cabin walls. Jedediah looked at them both, his sharp eyes flickering between the steel of the gun and the steel of their resolve. The silence stretched, heavy with tension. And then, without a word, Jedediah stepped back, muttered under his breath, and disappeared into the storm. When the door closed, the fire crackled louder, as if celebrating a victory. Clara and Ethan exchanged a look, one that said more than words ever could. We stayed. It wasn't just defense. It was partnership. It was presence. It was the courage to remain when the world tried to push you out. In the days that followed, life settled into a quiet rhythm. They rose early, tended the fire, chopped wood, and prepared coffee. Clara swept the floor, lined the shelves, and organized the space as though each detail stitched her more firmly into the life she was building. Ethan worked with steady hands, never rushing, never complaining. Their days became a kind of dance, one step, then the other, each action echoing with trust. At the town dance months later, they moved together across the floor. Lanterns flickered, music filled the room, and critical eyes followed them. Whispers rose like smoke, some judging, some pitying. But Clara and Ethan paid no mind. They danced slow, steady, moving not to please anyone, but to affirm what they already knew. Love needs no applause. It only needs presence. When spring came, so did their wedding. It was held in the small chapel at the edge of town, a simple wooden building with a cracked bell and benches worn smooth from years of use. The snow had melted into mud. The earth smelled raw and fresh. Clara entered alone, her trunk carried not by hands but in memory, the symbol of everything she had endured. Ethan stood at the front, not waiting to claim her, but ready to walk beside her. The ceremony was quiet. No applause, no cheers, no grand gestures, just witnesses who understood the rare courage of those who choose to stay. When Clara placed her hand in Ethan's, it was not a surrender. It was a pact, a shared decision to remain, to face storms together, to carry burdens side by side. And so, in the heart of the Old West, Clara Hayes and Ethan Blackwood showed that true love is not measured by promises or fine words, but by the steady presence of two souls who refuse to walk away. For you, listening now, the lesson is clear. In your relationships, with your partner, with your family, with your friends, and even with yourself, what matters most is not the beauty of words, but the constancy of presence. It is in the choice to remain, in the decision to face hardships rather than flee, that love and loyalty are proven. So, I ask you, have you chosen to stay when everything turned hard? Or have you walked away when things stopped being easy? What would it look like in your own life to stay, to remain, to show presence when the world tempts you to leave? Start small. Begin with daily acts, listening without distraction, showing up when you're needed, being consistent even when nobody claps. These small acts are the bricks that build a life of meaning, a love that endures. Share your own story in the comments below. Tell us about a time when you chose to stay, even when it was difficult. And if this story touched you, subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next tale.